given that we're starting here, right, with this idea of the stages of change, I really wanted to show you this I kind of put together. I think this is an important piece, which is if we're talking about this, like bringing things together, where might you use each of these evidence-based practices? Okay, and so I already alluded to this. Motivational interviewing is often best. It's a stylistic strategy. It's not a theoretical orientation. It's a way of having a conversation about change. And I have more slides about that coming up. So that's a great thing to do when folks are like, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure what's going on. I'm not really sure if I even want to be here. This wasn't my idea. It's a great place to have it. When someone is at the place of being prepared to change, certainly with MI, we can start to collect the change talk. Like what kinds of things? Sounds like, you're ready to do this. You've been thinking about it. You really want to. You've taken some steps. What do you think you might do next? But it's also a place where we might be coaching or supporting folks around maybe doing some work in a cognitive behavioral way or using DBT. And then in action and maintenance, DBT and CBT are very structured, and they're structured to give folks tools to change their lives. So folks generally need to be in action in order to do that, right? Like folks want to be coming back and participating and, bringing in diary cards or bringing in their agendas, talking about what they're doing. And in order to maintain the behavior change, actually, that's sometimes a good place for motivational interviewing as well, because there can be things in our environment that we can be ambivalent about, actually. Like, I really want to stop drinking, but I have all my friends in my apartment building around me who are drinking, and so it's really hard to stop. So I might have to return to having conversations with someone's ambivalent about how they respond to their neighbors, as an example. But many times the CBT and DBT can be brought in and often are part of the maintaining behavior change. So people are learning effective skills over time. And then with this idea of recurrence, there's so much learning that comes from recurrence. And DBT and CBT actually have great interventions around understanding linkages. And some of you might have heard of ideas like behavior chaining, with this idea of being able to look at a behavior and think about what happened before that behavior that set someone up to have that behavior occur, and then what are the consequences that sometimes reinforce the behavior or sometimes don't, but helping people understand how things are linked. So relapse, we have here, recurrence, is a really important place for learning and growth. And it really is very much part of all these models, because none of us change in a straight line. You've probably seen that. I didn't include it in here, but you've probably seen those slides where it has how we think change is going to occur. And it has point A to point B, and there's a straight line. And then it's like how change really occurs. And there's point A and point B, and there's a squiggly line up and down all over the place. That's really speaking to this. And the idea of recurrence speaks to that. So as we learn the skills and think about, motivational interviewing and dialectical behavior therapy, I know we put on the advertisement for this class that really this is meant for people who have had exposure to both. Like it's an impossible task for me to teach people MI and DBT and CBT in 3 hours. Like that's not going to happen. But for to come in with all your knowledge and be able to think about, what are some of the ways these things are similar, and like there's some overlap in in the various areas. So that can be helpful when you're thinking about what you've already learned in these areas. And I will review some concepts. But then they're obviously different things, right? I mean, otherwise it had the same name, maybe. There's a reason you would distinguish your CBT from DBT. And so we'll talk about that as well, ways that things are different. Yeah, and Joanne, I'm noticing your comment about the behavior chain. And I'm going to put a pin there, but if I don't remember, remind me, this idea that you're bringing up, which I really love, it's a great dialectical dilemma. The behavior chaining is so helpful but it's also really hard for people because of the detail. And that is a great place for the motivational interviewing skills to be just a part of that curiosity as someone's trying to roll that out. To remind me, I'll talk about a little bit about what I'm thinking about that later on. I just did this myself. I, didn't do anything else besides, I didn't do any additional research. I just kind of put my own spin on this. So I didn't do anything else besides come up with my own experience around this, the idea that we often talk about in terms of knowledge, skills, and attitude. I'm like, where do I think like all of these things kind of fit together? So I think that we definitely have some common factors in all three of these approaches around the stages of change, which is why I started with that. The dialectics kind of both and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And balancing strategies, being very process oriented. If I'm sitting with someone and I want to teach them a communication skill and they just are not having it, I'm getting a lot of yeah buts, I don't know, someone's shutting down. Like that's indication to me to change my strategy. This person needs to be listened to right now. They're not ready for this. And I can see like this would be so good. They really need this. But here's an important thing to remember. And this is actually a quote from Marshall Linehan from the DBT community, which I love, which is, it's better to be effective than it is to be right. What that means is absolutely 100% this person could benefit from communication skills, but they're not open to it right now. So I'm right that they would need this, but if I pursue this, I'm just not going to be effective, and they're going to continue to push back. So resistance, people aren't resistant. We're all resistant at times when we don't want to do something we don't want to do, right? Someone came in here right now and, I don't know, made me eat something I really don't like. You'd see me right at this moment resist, even though I'm not, just a resistant person per se, but, our behavioral context, like what happens to us, the things that we're presented with will determine whether we're engaged and moving forward or whether we resist. And people push back for different things. Change is hard. So we have folks who they don't want to do it at various times, but maybe they do want to do it and they can be mixed. And when we're ambivalent, there can be some of that pushback just because we're trying to move too fast to have someone change. And that's a really important concept. I'm going to bring that back in the motivational interviewing. These are all the skills of reflective listening, open-ended questions, affirming and reframing. These are the skills, micro skills, common therapeutic factors. They're the core of motivational interviewing, but we use these in other approaches as well. And also in all these approaches, everyone talks about the importance of being flexible and non-judgmental, engaging folks, and being really person-driven. So these are definitely similarities that we have amongst all the models. So that's something you can come into thinking about, well, here's a way I could potentially connect amongst all these pieces. So I put some specific factors, and some of these I've already talked about, especially when you might use them in terms of action and pre-action. There's also some other pieces that are important in terms of like how we're working with folks. So in CBT and DBT, you're going to have more specific like protocol and maybe even consultation about how you would do it. MI is much is also, everything's process oriented to some degree. I'm responding to the person in front of me, but MI is very process oriented, and there's no agenda necessarily set. Like when we first meet with someone, like we will eventually maybe create some sort of agenda that they want to do, but it's basically more fluid, especially when you're first getting started and we're feeling out where someone's ready to talk. Also, we have CBT and DBT. There are some real specific skill sets that you learn as a therapist and that we're often promoting, which would include, looking at CBT, negative irrational thoughts, behavioral experimentation and rehearsals. And then in DBT, we have the 4 specific skill sets that we're teaching people around mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotional regulation, and interpersonal communication. So these are definitely the things that make the different approaches distinct. I'm going to explore some of these in a bit more depth, just so you get that sense. Just want to give you a sense of like the distinctions and the commonalities. Also, if you're considering what approach to use, here are some places. I won't be reading this slide, but I have this in here for your reference, where we have a lot of evidence base, and there's probably more evidence base out there. I know motivational interviewing being part of that community, like every week, it seems like, probably not that often, but certainly several times a year, there are, books coming out about MI, for various situations and conditions and issues. And they're all, research-based books. CBT and DBT have just incredible research base as well. And it's why many of you, especially if you're in like public health settings or in community mental health, you've come to learn to use these interventions because they are really effective. They're really effective for a lot of complicated situations. Things that we see that we deal with a lot in community mental health, including things like, self-harm, non-suicidal self-harm, all the anxiety disorders, including, post-traumatic stress disorder, the mood disorders and thought disorders as well. One of the other things I'm trained in, out of the scope of this training clearly, is cognitive behavioral therapy for psychosis. And that's it's been a really powerful intervention about how to start to use these techniques and set an agenda and help people learn skills when there's a pretty significant thought disorder occurring, right? That we've used this in so many various contexts, which have really been quite challenging. And the applications have absolutely been really impressive.